Hello class, welcome to Module 6, Week B, where we continue our discussion on performance management. As you remember, you were recently appointed administrator of a public health organization, and your governing body charged you with to assess the capacity and improve the performance of an organization in order to achieve full accreditation within 3 years. You have 100 days to produce a credible plan to achieve this goal. This week, we're going to focus on how to design an aspirational job description and how to conduct a budget analysis and a reduction framework strategies. In this video, I'm going to just briefly go over what are the key points of the tool workshop that we hope you gain from working on these tools, and please join the live session that we're going to host this week so that you can learn more in depth of how to use these tools. The first tool workshop is to design a job description. Here you see that there's many components of a job description. First is content describing the tasks and duties, requirement known as KSA, which is knowledge, skills, and attributes, and the content of the job description, which is the purpose of the position, responsibility, working conditions, and the supervision above and below. And here you would then create the actual job description that's specific to what you're looking for, what help or what assistance or what do you want this person to do with this organization. To dive more deeply into a job description, it would contain a title, the department of where the person will be working, grade or classification is available, supervisor title, who they would be reporting to, and a brief paragraph about outlining the specific duties and responsibility. So working in your team, develop a mini job description, see below, to include the job posting for Barbara Simmons' successor in this particular example that we've been working over throughout this semester, and specifically look at some of the brief overview paragraphs that we want you to really hone down to, and list specific duties and responsibility that you want this person to help with the organization, and specific qualifications that you're looking for. Do they have to have a master's, numbers of years of experience? The second tool workshop is budget reduction decisions. This is a key tool to learn when you're managing any organization, is to have a clear understanding of financial intelligence. This is important to oversee the organization's financial operation from a day-to-day basis, and long-term goals, like what do you need to do operational to meet these goals, and how do we increase the revenues and decrease the costs so that organization is operating successfully and effectively. Here's an example of a FORMA business budget. And as you can see, this is an example of some of the key categories that are often in a FORMA. A FORMA is a spreadsheet that looks at the expenses and any revenue currently, and then it makes a projection. Like it makes a projection of what could be planned expenses, and then you compare the actual expenses and the planned expenses, and you see if there's any variabilities. And this helps guide decision making whether to expand a project or cut down the cost in supporting a project. Some things to keep in mind are some of the terms, such as when they say managing working capital. What do they mean by that? Like, it can include increasing revenue, reducing expenses, and also it's a really important idea to look at ways to manage cash flows in and out, and making sure that your organization has some liquid, which means cash at hand, so that it can easily purchase something rather than waiting for a while for some of the services being paid. Maybe there's like it won't be paid in a month, so you're then won't have cash at hand. So it's important to have these different items available to you. Some other things to think about is managing budgets. So there's many different types of budget. There's the operational budget, which is the cash budget, the annual budget from year to year, like have you been improving, or has the organization been in overspending? What are some of the expense budget, revenue budget, and what's a capital budget? Planning for expenditures for long-term assessments. Here's an example of a budget summary report, and you can see here that this is looking at month to month. So this says month, the actual expenses, and month targets, and then you see the differences. There's basically the variance is taking the actual minus the target, and that gives you a variance. And wherever there is a minus in terms of if it was overspent, it's often expressed either as a negative or in parentheses. And if you want to highlight it, you can also put in red fonts, and it's just easier for everyone to have the same nomenclature. Account receivable is considered the current assets created by doing business, consisting of revenues recognized but not yet collected as cash. Capital budget. Some things to think about when you are thinking about, does this asset at least pay for half itself? What's the break-even points? And things to think about when you are including items in your capital budget is, the land. Like, do you lease the land or do you actually own the land? What's the cost of the information technology structure? Like, if you have a server, does it need to be upgraded? And any of the staff, like, are they permanent or temporary? So as you can see, managing cost and revenue in healthcare organizations and in public health organization requires a lot of detail because it's a very interrelated relationship between multiple processes and the interplay of many departments. As you can see, like, you need to get all this information from different departments to make sure what is being spent and how resources are being utilized, and also how external influences can impact your budget. So for example, if there's an inflation and all the costs are also double, so how will you manage in your own budget to purchase these things, or either find creative ways to increase your revenue in order to afford the things that are now twice as much now. Here's an example of a real budget from an organization. The purpose of this discussion is just to give you an idea of like how do budgets look, and from different organizations can have different type of budget forms and what is meaningful to them. So you want to align your budget forms, your pro forma, align it to the industry that you're working at. Here you can see that the budget is laid out by resources by funds and resources by outcome. And it's listed by year to year. So looking at year 2012 to 2013 and 2014. And it looks at the changes between the years. And then it looks at what was actual and what was actually projected. So now I know you're thinking, well, I know my budget actual. How do I make the projection? Like, how do I actually make cuts or either budget more creatively for increase? So let's say in this example, you're doing a budget analysis and reduction, and you can assume that the final decision calls for a 5% reduction. Like, that's like if you knew ahead of time, that's going to be a reduction. Then looking at the 13 items in your organization, if this is what's included, you will identify what are specific items that you would cut, knowing that this would be a 5% reduction. So for example here, you will see that in this example, you see there's at least at a 15% cut. How would that look? And then if there was a 5% cut, how would that look? And you can see that if you were to present this to the funders or to your board of directors, you can see that, okay, what would be realistic? If we were to cut 15% across, this would be the cost savings. But if we were to cut 5% across these 13 items, we will be saving this much. And is it worth it to us to cut is it worth it to us to cut 15% where we'll be saving $4 million, but it's going to impact the outcome that we're going to yield to our community? If there's going to be like less people getting health services or preventive care services, like how would it actually impact the community? So this is something to think about, is that even though you might have a lot of pressure to cut at 15%, but if you could present that, okay, well, if I were to cut at 5%, which is less than the 15%, and even though that's we won't be saving as much, but maybe there's going to be an increase in specific maybe it'll be increased, or maybe you maintain the same level of health outcomes. And another way to think about it is, well, if we were to increase 5% only on certain items and have the other items remained, how would that change the overall outcome? So for today's, for this week's module, the tool is to do a budget analysis and reduction proposal for 10% for North Upland State Health Department's budget. So in this example, give students, each student will identify $3,022,000 in cuts based on a greater or less harm rationale. So, when you're cutting or when you're deciding to cut something, it's also very important to discuss with or actually you need to showcase to your constituents and your employees why you're cutting these things. Because then, if they see the cut, it's very personal to them. But if they see the reason why you're cutting at 5% or 10%, and as opposed to 15 or 1%, with the rationale, it will help them accept the fact that this is how it is, but we can still achieve what we want to achieve. So for this assignment, go ahead and work with this assignment. And I think the whole idea is just play around the numbers, see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense.